Eleanor Whittaker had spent nearly 72 years on this earth, and she had seen more than her share of joys and heartbreaks. She had raised 3 kids, lost her beloved husband Thomas to a sudden heart attack in his 60s, and worked as a school librarian until retirement. Her small house in the quiet town of Greenville was paid off, the garden was always tended, and the rocking chair on the porch rarely sat empty for long. Yet, despite all her years of experience and wisdom, Eleanor had noticed something shifting, something subtle but stinging. It started with her son, Daniel, cutting her off during conversations at dinner. Then her youngest daughter, April, began taking phone calls mid-visit and talking to her as though she were a child. Even her grandchildren, sweet as they once were, had grown distant. Her oldest granddaughter, Michelle, had once sat on her lap for hours while Eleanor read fairy tales. Now she barely said hello before disappearing into her phone. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't anger. It was worse, it was disregard. Eleanor noticed it in public too. Clerks spoke over her. Waiters avoided eye contact. She once stood at the pharmacy for 15 minutes before someone acknowledged her presence. The world seemed to have decided that the moment she turned 70, she had become invisible. It wasn't just frustrating, it was humiliating. One evening, after a particularly difficult day when her neighbor's teenage son scoffed at her for asking him to turn his music down, Eleanor sat in her rocking chair and let the tears fall. But she wasn't one to wallow. She had lived too much life to give up without a fight. She wiped her tears and reached for the worn leather notebook she kept on the end table, Thomas's old journal. She opened it to a blank page and wrote in large, firm letters, "Starting tomorrow, they will respect me." The first thing she did was simple. She straightened her posture. Seemed small, but it changed everything. No more shuffling around in worn house slippers with her shoulders hunched. Eleanor began each morning with a stretch, put on a fresh blouse, jeans that fit her right, and a pair of comfortable but supportive sneakers. She looked in the mirror and smiled, not because she saw a younger woman, but because she saw a proud one. She began to speak up more, not loudly but clearly. At the diner she visited each Sunday morning, she started asking the waiter's name and addressing him directly. "Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate your service." She smiled, tipped well, and walked out with her head held high. The next Sunday, Marcus greeted her before she even stepped through the door. Eleanor also made a decision to stop complaining about her ailments. While she still had her doctor visits and her knees ached like clockwork, she made a conscious choice to not let her conversations revolve around her health. Instead, she asked questions. She became a listener again. Whether it was at the park, the grocery store, or even her church group, Eleanor gave people space to talk about themselves. And when she did speak, she shared stories, not rants. People leaned in to hear her tell about the time she backpacked through Colorado in the 70s, or about the unlikely friendship she struck up with a jazz musician while on a solo trip to New Orleans. Her grandkids started to notice. Michelle came over one afternoon while Eleanor was painting in her backyard. "Grandma, since when do you paint?" she asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor looked up, her hands covered in pastels. "Since I stopped waiting for someone else to make my day interesting," she said with a grin. Michelle sat down, and for the first time in years, they had a conversation that wasn't interrupted by screens or sighs. The transformation didn't stop there. Eleanor joined the local community center's volunteer group. At first, she simply helped serve meals at shelters, but before long, she was running donation drives and organizing reading sessions at the local library for children. People started referring to her as Miss Ellie, with admiration and respect. Her photo was even featured in the town paper under the headline, "Local Senior Brings New Life to Old Books." But the true turning point came at the family Thanksgiving gathering. Eleanor had been quiet during these events in the past, sitting at the edge of the living room while the chaos unfolded around her. But this year she brought a handmade scrapbook, filled with photos, notes, and memories from everyone's childhood. After dinner, she gathered her children and grandchildren, cleared her throat and said, "I want to share something." The room quieted, and for the first time in years, Eleanor had everyone's attention. She opened the scrapbook and started flipping pages. There were pictures of Daniel's first Little League game, a handwritten note from April saying, "I want to be just like you, Mom," and a faded drawing Michelle had made in kindergarten. There were stories, too, about the time Thomas burned the turkey on Christmas and how they all ended up eating pancakes in their pajamas. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Eleanor closed the scrapbook and looked around. "We forget things," she said, her voice steady. "We forget who we are to each other. But I'm still here. I've always been here. And I have so much more to give, if you're willing to see me again." The silence was heavy but warm. Then Daniel stood up, walked over and hugged her. "We're listening now, Mom." That night, Eleanor didn't cry in frustration. She smiled to herself as she lay in bed, feeling more alive and more seen than she had in years. The journey wasn't just about being respected. It was about demanding that respect with dignity, grace, and a spark of rebellion. In the months that followed, Eleanor became something of a legend in her community. She taught storytelling classes at the library and mentored young girls through a local youth empowerment group. People came to her for advice, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted her opinion. Even strangers at the grocery store would approach her saying, "Are you the lady who started the Respect Yourself First talks?" The phrase caught on mostly because Eleanor lived it. She made a short video about her journey. Nothing fancy, just a candid clip filmed by Michelle, where Eleanor looked straight into the camera and said, "In old age, no one will disrespect you, if you first decide never to disrespect yourself." The video went viral within the town's social circle, and even made its way onto a few national senior empowerment blogs. Eleanor was invited to speak at a local college event about intergenerational relationships. Standing before students in their 20s, she didn't lecture. She told stories. And they listened. That same neighbor boy who once scoffed at her. He now waved eagerly every time he passed her house. He even offered to help her with yard work and, at her invitation, sat for lemonade and a few lessons on jazz records. By age 75, Eleanor wasn't just respected, she was cherished. But it wasn't because she changed who she was. It was because she embraced herself more fully than ever before. She set boundaries, pursued passions, shared wisdom without arrogance, and listened without judgment. Years later, when she passed peacefully in her sleep, over 200 people showed up at her memorial. They told stories of how she had touched their lives, not with grand gestures, but with presence, with strength, with love. Michelle, now a mother herself, stood before the crowd and said, "My G,